My name is Sarah Faulkner. I'm the program manager for Device Talks. So it's my great joy to recruit all these wonderful speakers, plan the program. If you're interested in getting involved with that, please talk to me. I could use all the help that I can get from you guys. This is our 8th year here in Boston, so not our first rodeo, but we're always growing. This event would not be possible if it weren't for attendees who come back every year, who tell me that they love it, who give me constructive criticism. I need all of that to grow. So it wouldn't be possible without attendees, and it also certainly would not be possible without sponsors, many of whom have stuck with us for all 8 years. And that pool of sponsors is always growing as well. Just to name a few, I won't go on forever, Finnegan, Green Hills Software, MPR Product Development, Toxicon, Viant, Zymedica, 3M, Abbott, Greenberg Traurig, and KDB. These are names that most of us in the audience are familiar with, and they've been really huge supporters of the event, so I'm extremely grateful to them. The purpose of this event is twofold. One, it's to give good stories a place to be told. So it's really a platform for the development process stories of leadership, that kind of thing. And the second purpose is really to bring people together, whether that's for networking, you can meet fellow folks in the industry, or just sharing lessons learned from colleagues. And in that spirit, I'm very, very, very excited to introduce our first 2 speakers of the day that'll just be having a nice chat, and we encourage all of you to participate in that chat. So first I'll introduce Brian Johnson, who was actually formerly my boss. He started this whole Device Talks shindig, so it's really all his fault. But now he is the president and CEO of MassDevice. And he will be interviewing David Knapp, who is a very familiar voice in the industry. I'm sure many of you know him. If you don't yet know him, you should meet him. He's the vice president of corporate research for Boston Scientific. So without further ado, please give them your attention and a warm welcome.
Let's do it. Thank you, Sarah. Very kind words. And it's great to be back on the dais at Device Talks. It's a little like going to your ex-wife's wedding, but it's much more pleasant. I feel good to be here. I feel good to be back in the comfy seats, and it's great to be with you, Dave. I feel like Boston Scientific, I can kind of trace my whole sort of med tech journalism career, kind of watching that company. And I don't think I totally understood the company until I got into this role, and I actually got a chance to go up to Marlboro and really start talking about the company, understanding its breadth. And really, I think if we could get one thing settled today for the group, I think they would love to know, if we could get an overview of Boston Scientific in terms of, so like in Marlboro we have, because we have corporate headquarters in Marlboro, right? And then we have endoscopy, and then women's health, right?
Yep.
But paint the picture for these folks as to where these sort of brain centers are for Boston Scientific, if you could, please.
Okay. Well, first of all, I just, before I start into that, I just want to say how thrilled I am to be here, and huge thank you to Device Talks and MassDevice, for giving me this opportunity. And so, just an overview of Boston Scientific, and I love how you put it, the brain centers, because it really is all about the people at Boston Scientific. I've been with the company for going on 20 years, going to be this fall. And so, what I've seen is the company grow over that time from what was a pretty focused portfolio on essentially stents and drug-eluting stents, cardiovascular, to what is just an extremely diverse portfolio today, really almost equally distributed amongst our cardiovascular on the one side and our medical surgical on the other side. And really, if you think about sort of where that is distributed, at least in the United States today, Minnesota is kind of the home for our cardiovascular businesses. And then our med surge businesses, which includes endoscopy, urology, and pelvic health, as well as our neuromodulation businesses. So those first two are located here in Boston, in Marlborough, as well as our corporate headquarters there, as you mentioned, and our executive team. And then our neuromodulation team is located in the LA area in Valencia. So just from a global perspective, BSC has grown enormously globally, and that development is a huge part of that. So we now have R&D centers in Shanghai and in New Delhi, as well as in Ireland, of course. We've been there for 25 years, and now in Galway and Cork and Clonmel, and Costa Rica as well. So we really have a global network from a development and, of course, manufacturing and sales perspective.
And then all those sort of different R&D centers, do they report up into you or
Yeah,
Randy
it's an
out in
interesting.
Minnesota? I mean, how do you funnel ideas up through the pipeline there?
Right. So Boston Scientific is what I would say it's, kind of always this balance between essentially enterprise and divisional, right? And for a large organization, and what we have found is really our most effective structure really is more weighted on the divisional side. So we really give the businesses autonomy to kind of control their own destinies. That means that the development organizations are actually reporting into the businesses for the most part. But what we do is we also have a corporate R&D function, global R&D function, of which I am one of the leaders, and basically that cuts across all the businesses. So we really connect the dots, as well as leverage technologies across the businesses. And then we also have the opportunity to see kind of what are the needs in the businesses and really try and connect those needs globally. So we have a sort of a global scouting team that reports into me that does that. And then, of course, all of the shared functions, there's certain things that we have found just work better from an enterprise perspective. So shared labs, shared documentation systems, shared product development systems, et cetera. All of that is driven from a global perspective. So I actually report into our global operations team, which includes quality, IT, et cetera. And that is probably 2/3 of the company. Yeah. So
do you get to think big, or do you have to think very small?
Yeah, so in this role, it is, I've had a lot of different kinds of roles with the company, and this particular role is think big. Yeah. It has to be, right? Because the company is just growing so fast. We need to be thinking about what's next. And sometimes I think within the businesses, they have an idea of what's next for them in their portfolios. But in order to grow and to help more and more patients and providers around the world, we have to be thinking about what's next from both from a technology perspective as well as from a disease state and anatomy perspective. So it's really help the executive team to do that, and we work really collaboratively with our strategy and business development teams to make that happen.
Yeah, we're going to kind of look at sort of the what's next in a minute, but I kind of want to just pull it back for a second and ask you, as you're thinking big, as you're evaluating, are there any core sort of personal beliefs that drive you when it comes to medical innovation and evaluating opportunity and opportunity cost?
Yeah, so, just starting from, Sarah talked about stories. I think the thing that really drove me to be in this world, in this medtech world, ultimately was, I think for a lot of people and for myself, really driven by family. So I grew up, in a situation where my father actually had type 2 diabetes, and he actually passed away, shortly after I was out of college, and so. He wasn't really able to manage that chronic disease in a way that was adequate. He struggled with it his whole life, and it was a major part of who we were as a family, actually. And I saw that, along with other relatives who were struggling with chronic disease. So I think that really impacted me. And so my leadership philosophy is really kind of derived from, seeing them go through what they had to go through without having the tools or, frankly, the benefit of what we're starting to see today in terms of patient empowerment and the kinds of help that we're going to see across the spectrum and the continuum of care. So I've been sort of motivated, I think, by that. And in terms of selecting, looking forward for the company, we're just seeing more and more a burden of chronic disease, and it's not going away. Yeah. It's just going to increase, and this is a global phenomenon, not just in the United States. So as a result, I think we're beginning to sort of move our portfolio in that direction, sort of away from transactional care and in a very acute setting. We'll still be addressing that, but as a centerpiece, but then expanding our view to sort of earlier disease detection to make those acute transactions more effective, as well as really monitoring those patients once they've been, and sort of being a part of the larger story for patients and for caregivers.
So how does that dovetail with the corporate philosophy when they're evaluating a new? So your core belief, impacting patients' chronic disease. How does that play out with your corporate role? You take that as a personal role, and then what is the company's core beliefs when it comes to developing new products? Is it how are they moving the needle internally? How do they judge that?
Yeah, so our core strategy has been, and I would say this is. Been over the last about 5 years, I would say, and Mike Mahoney has led the company sort of to this strategy, and I think it's been unbelievably effective. Sort of once he was able to really turn around the ship, right? And I think that he basically said, okay, we want to lead in all of the categories that we are in. Okay, so at that time. That was a stretch goal, but I think we've really been able to get there in many of the I think it never arrived, right? But we're feeling good about that strategy, and it's really done well for us. So that category leadership strategy. So focus in on strengthening all of the businesses we have. So that means, for example, in interventional cardiology, where, we had largely a drug-eluting stent business, thinking about where the growth areas, we actually did quite a bit of front-end work to understand what is the landscape out there in interventional cardiology, thinking about new areas of that, and then once we strategically identified some of those areas like structural heart and, going after both internal work as well as external plays to kind of make that happen. Right. And, so that's sort of been the strategy and the playbook that has worked. I would say from a white space perspective and thinking about, where do we sort of see the shiny objects and where can we kind of sort through those, I would say that's very early days, for Boston Scientific, but you can kind of see it in some of the moves that we've made, over the last year or two, where we've gotten into some more diagnostic plays, for example, Envision being one of those, as well as we were just talking about before this. Kind of getting a little bit, so seeing pain with an adjacency in sort of the orthopedic space. So that's sort of the way that we're branching into new areas. Yeah. So I hope that addresses that question.
Yeah, I guess I was also thinking about, if you're maintaining a leadership position, sometimes big bets are very risky. So how risk averse is the company?
Yeah.
Is there a core, like we talked a little bit about the idea of compassion. Is there something not on the balance sheet that is there driving everybody internally there?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, when Mike came in, he really laid out a strategy, which I talked about, right? But he also laid out values. And it's not that Boston Scientific didn't have, I mean, Boston Scientific had incredibly strong values before that really came from the founders. So Pete Nicholas, John Abley, laid that out for us. But we live our values, and
I knew that was going to happen.
we live our values at Boston Scientific, and they are sort of at the center of what we do. And we are so those values, include. They start with caring, and this happens to be, and we celebrate those values on an ongoing basis. Mm-hmm. This actually, we're always kind of. Thanks, Maria.
Thank you.
So this happens to be the week that we're really celebrating that particular value, but I see it as cutting through the other ones, which include meaningful innovation, diverse collaboration, diversity and inclusion. Yeah. Those are the kinds of things that really that really drive us, and frankly, they're in our vocabulary, and they actually fuel everything that we do. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of, I'd say, it really has defined the culture of the company in a way that, that can only be done over the span of years. It doesn't happen overnight. Yeah. My own story kind of really mirrors that. I think over the last, 3 or 4 years for me, or I'd say in this particular role that I'm in, I've really gotten involved in many other aspects of the company as a leader. So, for example, I'm on the, I help. We have a pretty, fantastic employee resource group network within there, and I'm the executive sponsor for one of those. And then I also serve on the board of the foundation of the company and things like that. Yeah. So it drives who we are, and it actually motivates as well in the day jobs that we do. So.
Yeah, and I can attest to the employee resources groups are fantastic, and the corporate social responsibility program that you guys have launched is really is great and ambitious and really important, I think, to sort of think beyond healthcare in some respects in terms of how you are as a corporate citizen. I wanted to drill into the current trends because we're talking about what's next, and I feel like when we talk about what's next, we're really, if we're not talking about digital health, we sure as heck should be. I personally feel that the movement of tech giants like Amazon and Google into health tech are kind of the elephant in the room for our industry. Yep. I was hoping we could focus on this. MedTech should have the insider advantage on digital health, right? In many ways, we are the only industry like literally inside the body. We are as close to the patient as you can get, and yet I do feel like MedTech can be a little bit not the most patient friendly, right? So like we know them better than anybody, but do we know how to talk to them well? So I'm going to ask you some questions about digital health, and I hope we can have a robust conversation about this. What is MedTech's role in driving digital health adoption, and are we suited to do it? The opportunity seems to be there. How can we capture it?
Right. So first of all, digital health is one of the areas that we really have pushed on, both from a global perspective, and we've been working on it now for some time. As a company, I would say, and I think as an industry, but specifically as an organization, we have been actually working on digital health for, I would say 15 years. And when I say that, and I kind of think about digital health, I'm really thinking about some of the ways that we can basically provide sort of individual applications to engage patients, things that are, can also kind of help with the ecosystem and really educate, empower, et cetera, as well as, really having, as you mentioned, very sort of Internet of Things sensors that are located in devices and digital devices and data that is sort of securely gathered through that. And then we've been able to, over the span of many years, develop algorithms to actually have an impact on patient care. Mm-hmm. So I'll give you an example of that at Boston Scientific, and it may help at least start out the conversation. So in our rhythm management division, we've been doing, as I said, we've been doing this for some time. And there's a team there that's been working on a project looking at essentially data collected from sensors in active implantables, pacemakers, defibrillators. And by using those data over time, we've been able to develop algorithms which we now have implanted in our defibrillators, which essentially alert a physician when somebody with heart failure is beginning to decompensate. Now, they may not be feeling anything. They may be feeling fine, right? But their physiological signals are, decompensating in a way that they, essentially a physician is beginning to see if they cross a threshold that they define. It's really important that they, have that control. Then they are able to reach out and say, hey, we need to change something. You're kind of, if we don't do that soon, you're going to be in the hospital. And I think that that's been incredibly successful, and I think we are building on that strategy and technology, moving forward. So for me, the unique advantage that medical device and med tech has over, whether it be over the big tech companies or over pharma companies or other providers, is that we have been doing this for some time. It's a natural fit for us, and we know what it takes to be successful, to be able to essentially implement a population health, population health solution such as the one I just described.
Right. So that you make a very strong case.
Yep.
What are your plans with that data and the things that you learn about that patient that they don't know about themselves that can be extrapolated to population health? To me, that's where the real opportunity, the sort of mushroom cloud opportunity is, right? I mean,
right.
Like understanding your patients that already have embedded products is great for your business. I wonder, and is this your job to think population health? How do we take this and make it something that can go even earlier into the disease state? I mean, how do we take what you've learned and then put it out and help more people get healthy?
Right.
Is that your job? I mean, I don't even know.
Well, I see it as my job, but there's nothing that happens in a company like Boston Scientific. There's nothing that happens that's just me, right? I mean, it's a team of people working on it with sort of very diverse experiences cutting across. I think for this particular area, though, what's been really critical for us has been a collaboration between R&D, which I kind of represent, and IT. I mean, fundamentally, this area is an intersection of those two functions in the company. Now, that being said, it's inclusive of all the other functions, that are there, regulatory, clinical, et cetera. Quality, they all play a key role, so I don't want to minimize that. But just from a technology enabling standpoint and kind of getting to creating some of these solutions, it's really a collaboration between IT and R&D. So our leader in the company of IT is Jody Eddy. She's our CIO. Yeah. And I'd say 5 or 6 years ago, we were attending a conference in New York City thinking about neurology and digital neurology. And I think, with our neuromodulation team, it's sort of our other division that is working with active implantables, right? They are arguably closest to the patients, and have been for the whole time, because they have to be. It's a very personal thing, somebody's pain, et cetera. Yeah. So we were really digging in there, and at that meeting in New York, we really kind of agreed to form kind of a joint collaboration within the company to explore digital health and be able to doing essentially DevOps in the digital health world is very, very different than, say, designing a TAVR valve. I mean, it's just it couldn't be more different in terms of the scope, in terms of the speed needed. I mean, there's literally order of magnitude faster. But we need to be able to do that also in a way that is robust, fits with our quality system, et cetera. So that actually was the challenge. We set up essentially an incubator within the company, and since then we've really grown that, and we brought in a chief digital health officer, David Fagan, right here in Boston, and now we have digital health operations across the company, and as well as applications in I think every division in the company. So it took a few years, I would say, to develop those capabilities and to bring those people in. But that is, that has been, I would say, the top level story for us.
Yeah. And so I guess it's a question of, there's no doubt that MedTech has the best data, right? In terms of this.
Unquestionably.
In terms of this, right? We have the best data. But do we have, as an industry, the patience that, say, an Apple sort of supposedly does? Tech companies change their minds too. We don't want to just say that, but the patience, a really well-funded company that has the chance that is willing to start at zero and build up, versus the company that has all the data and it's very proprietary. I wonder if you see it in those terms, or am I just being overly dramatic because I went to, I love a good story.
No, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, we've studied this very deeply, right? And I would just say, if you look at, where we're at, I don't think there's nothing that we do alone. I mean, the reality is that this is a broad That's what's so great about Boston, for example, is that, really every part of the ecosystem is located here, right? So you're able to bring it all together in what you do, and that's why your role is so important here, right? Is to be able to bring these pieces together. So we're out there. We want to collaborate with the startups in this space. We want to collaborate with the big tech companies in this space, as well as the other stakeholders that are in the system, to be able to bring essentially this digital health opportunity to really fruition. I mean, it's been out there for a long time. I think very complex, kinds of implementations initially really has simplified to the point where, in a focused way, it's actually showing value, right? So now in terms of the different roles that we play, as you said, we clearly as a med tech are very good at getting excellent data. We can be inside the body, locally, close to where those sensors need to be to get those signals. We aren't exclusive of wearables and things like that. We're also very interested in that. And minimally and non-invasive types of solutions. And we have infrastructure in place already to handle the data in a safe and secure way. I think the biggest strength we bring are the regulatory, the clinical, the sort of the whole package, to the table, and the clinical relationships as well. That's something that I think the tech companies are probably envious of and are starting to develop, themselves, but they are early on their learning curve.
Right.
And then when I talk about pharmaceutical companies, which have huge amount of resources, but this is not, sort of in their DNA and their development timelines, et cetera, and the way they do things, it's just very, very different. And so I think we actually have an advantage, and you talked about patience. I actually think we have the patience to get through, a 10-year development project on drug-eluting stents or valves or, deep brain stimulation. So for me, we have the patience. The question is, can we move fast enough? It's actually, I would turn it on its head. And I think the answer to that is yes. We've been able to essentially tailor our systems to be able to address these, really important issues in a way which is, I would say, can be even faster than a startup, because we have the resources to be able to move fast.
So when we look at this, are you concerned, excited, unsure about the opportunity? Is it all three? I mean, where do you lean on this?
Excited,
Yeah.
of those three words. Period, yeah. So I am excited because I want to benefit from it personally,
Yeah.
To be honest. I mean, there's nothing more, look, everybody has a story, right? And the reality is we all know people who would have benefited from earlier detection of a disease that they have, whether it be cancer or whether it be, cardiovascular disease, which are the two big killers. Early detection, early intervention, awareness, education, the ability to be able to measure and monitor, those are all things that digital health will, frankly, bring to the table. So I'm incredibly excited.
So thank you for indulging me in that conversation.
Yeah.
I think it's an important conversation to have. I think, to me, I look at it, like having come from the journalism world. Mm-hmm. I might be the sky is falling type guy going, hey, if we had figured out, how to open up our database, 20 years ago, instead of holding it so tight, maybe newspapers would still be viable today. So,
I see.
Sometimes maybe I take more of the concern side, but I do.
Sure.
I do think it seems like now is one of the most interesting times to be in this area. Yeah,
what you're going to see from not just from our company, but I think across the spectrum is that the solutions that are going to come out that are digital health solutions are going to be focused in the areas that really, I would say, kind of enhance the offerings that we have, mm-hmm. right? In a way, and sort of broaden the impact of them. Yeah. So I just think that's sort of where you're going to begin to see it, and you're already seeing it in the application I described, and there's others that are emerging. So I think once that starts to happen, and we begin to show the value of that, and actually have the experience, then we will. Just like with other things like, single-use disposables and other areas where we lead, I think we're going to begin to lead in that way as well. So we need to, that's the way, that is my job actually, is to stay enough ahead of the curve that we don't end up, becoming essentially obsolete.
How do you do that? Do you go to conferences? Do you hang out at TED-Med? Are you reading Reddit? What do you do? Where are you kind of scientific journals? Tell me how you educate yourself a little bit on how do you kind of put that picture together?
All of the above. There isn't one thing that you mentioned there that I don't do. But I can't read, it really gets to, when I was getting my PhD, one of my at University of Minnesota, one of the professors that I had there said, when you get done with this, I think it took me 5 years to get done. When you get done with this, you should be able to do the same thing in 1 year, right? Mm-hmm. Because you've learned essentially how to tackle this kind of a problem, and that's really what I guess 20 years in this industry has done. So I'm able to, I'd say, me as well as the other people that are working in strategic roles in the company are able to kind of scan and really dive deep where they need to and when they need to stay ahead. But it's not to say that we're 100% there. Sometimes we could be wrong. Yeah. And whereas you talked about opportunity costs, we can't do everything at once, right? And if that's the case, then we have the resources to bring to bear on it. But yeah, just also to answer your question, I have attended TED-Med. I did that last year, and I attended Exponential Medicine this past year. So I use those just as an examples, to kind of open up the mind. I think a role like this really is get out, really see what's out in the world. I speak to a lot of physicians. I try and speak to patients as well. Get out into the world, really see what the problems are and bring that back in, and then in a focused way, drive programs internally. Yeah. So
I'm going to switch gears a little bit to sort of stuff that hopefully some folks in the room can use.
Sure.
Startups in the room, there's a lot of people in product development. So so a lot of innovation happens at the front end, when you're defining the problem and the need. What tips do you have for engineers in those early stages of innovation?
Yeah. So for me, this is kind of the bread and butter of what we do. And when I think about the front end of innovation, for us, it really has to do with focusing in on the clinical needs. It's incredibly important to take time to get out and understand the voice of the customer, but not just what they say, to observe what they're doing, to get smart in an area, to know all the literature in a space where you're working. Of course, drives kind of the physiological knowledge that's needed to get into a new space. And then, so really doing a great job on that front end and defining the need through ethnography, through needs definition, et cetera, pays off, incredibly well down the road. So we have a sort of a term that we use called knowledge-driven product development, and basically, it may seem obvious, I guess, but you'd be surprised how often, people just want to skip right to the solution, and then you end up with larger and larger cross-functional teams with people who, are basically there to implement and execute on something that really should have been explored, and you could be working on something and making it real, and frankly, completely, you could make it work and then have it be a total flop because it doesn't address a real need. So we spend all that time on the front end. The other thing I would say in terms of speeding collaboration is small, focused, and empowered teams. We have to have, and diverse. So we have to have those, sort of engineering, clinical business skills on a team, and those can be sometimes under one person with different hats, but so we have teams of 1 to 3 people getting started with these early stage efforts. And if it gets to be a lot bigger than that, I get worried. Yeah. And we get to essentially getting to feasibility using sort of simple, small steps along the way. That is sort of one of our fundamental beliefs, and allowing them to fail and learn from their failure. So those are some of the really key elements that I would say are really important for early stage.
Is that kind of the key to empowering those teams, giving them the safe space to not succeed?
Well, I mean, so you're right. I mean, the answer to that is yes. I mean, so if we've, like I said, I report into a global operations team, so I know what that's like. We can't spend, the time in operations failing time after time.
Right.
That doesn't work, right? So I see that side of the business, and I've worked in that side of the business, but this is a completely different story, right? It's all about learning and knowledge gathering and understanding. So the way that happens is really through iteration and fast iteration. So really, you need an ecosystem to be able to do that kind of fast iteration. The way we accomplish that actually a lot of times is through collaboration, both internally, externally. And the external collaboration can find its way in really interesting, so we started 5 years ago, this Connected Patient Challenge, which happens right here in Cambridge. Yep. When I started it, people didn't understand why I was doing it, right? And why we were doing it as a company, because everybody sees the ideas. They're gathered on a website. And then, there's a sort of a Shark Tank that happens, and everybody sees those. So what is the exclusivity for Boston Scientific? We are learning, right, in a new space where we really want to learn. And we're not only a part of the ecosystem, but we're driving it, right? So that is an example of how that's an example of how we can actually speed innovation through collaboration. And we do the same thing also in more focused ways with providers. For example, Mayo Clinic, we have a great collaboration with them, as well as others here in Boston and around the world.
So again, for some of the companies, smaller companies that are in the room, how do they excite you? How do they not screw up when they get in front of you? How do they how do they get Dave Knapp to pay attention?
Yeah. So, one of the things I would say is that I am probably one of the most open people in the company. Like, I really,
You're
want to
very
hear
nice
all of
guy.
your stories.
You're a very
No,
nice
it's
guy.
not about being a nice guy, but, although I do live in Minnesota. But I would say that it's really about, number one, understand your value and really be able to communicate that in a way that differentiates you from others. So if you're coming in with a wearable that's measuring something, and then potentially an algorithm to sort things out, there may be a number of companies doing that. I'll just say it. So if that's the case, what is the particular value that you bring? It could be your business model. It could be something about the way that you're doing it and the technology that's unique, or it could be something about sort of how you're operating and how it makes. So I'd say that's the biggest thing, is differentiated value. And then the second thing is, when you're interacting with a company like ours, we have a lot of stakeholders in the company. It's a complex, network. So really knowing what you want to get from us is incredibly important. So do you want to engage with us and sort of, sometimes starts with financial, right? Then I can direct towards that part of the company. But a lot of times it's not. It could be more of a collaboration that's desired, or it could be strategic in nature. We have an incubator that we participate in Israel, for example, and in other areas as well here in the U.S., where the early stage companies, we're really trying to provide strategic guidance, and we're not. It isn't as much about financial investment. So I think that understanding what you want to get helps me to know what part of the company to garner in conversations with companies. So those are some of the things in terms of engaging. And the last thing I'll say is that, really just, it can be very helpful also to have almost like a mentor, somebody who is, in a strategic that is kind of helping you, guide you through that process. Because I think sometimes sometimes first impressions are incredibly important. And so getting in there and doing that well can be important right from the get-go.
So I think there's probably a couple of questions in the audience. So let's give you guys a chance to ask some questions, and then I can pop in if everybody's shy. There we go, right over here.
Tom Ryan, Vice President Sales with Advantage. Thank you so much, Dave. Can you talk a little bit about moving the portfolio away from transactional and the back end of the partnership or strategy standpoint? Can you give a couple of examples of moves that have already been successful within that?
Yeah. So I mean, I gave an example. I gave an example with this HeartLogic. So the rhythm management example is an example of that, sort of moving more towards monitoring. I'll talk a little bit more about one of the areas that I feel the company has really excelled in is trying to engage underserved populations. And I think, so we have an initiative that we started. So the question, I'm sorry, I should repeat the question because I'm not sure everybody heard it. It was what are examples of where we've moved away from transactional care and we're really moving more towards a more holistic, approach. So there was an initiative that we've started and we're continuing to really grow called Close the Gap, which, we think we realized that there were, underserved populations in medicine, including, for women and for certain, whether it be ethnically diverse or as well as socioeconomic status. So we wanted to sort of reach into that realm and kind of increase awareness, increase education, and we've done that through this organization, Close the Gap. It's actually, it's been fantastic. There are several examples where we've been able to engage, whether it be stakeholders in those areas, as well as actually doing some internal things. So we've looked at screening for our direct labor force as well to really increase awareness of disease and make sure that they are getting into the system right sooner and aware of things. So that's just another example in addition to the RM one.
Great.
Yeah.
Have one right up here. We got a microphone coming to you.
Thank you, David. My name's Lee. I'm from Taiwan. We're trying to establish a biomedical engineering institute in Boston area. Is your company would be interested in doing that with us?
So,
Way to take your shot.
yeah, the question, yeah, so I think, yeah. So I think that, I mean, one of the things I'll say is that we're incredibly active in Asia. We have a great leader there, Warren Wang, there, and he is passionate of not only about growing our business, in Asia, but about development there as well. And so I have just personally, in my organization, I have a team that's, members of my team that are located in Shanghai, in the region, as well as in Singapore, that are working on sort of increasing our footprint in Asia. So the question is about Boston and starting a development center here. And, I would love to talk to you about that. I mean, I think we have been incredibly active here in Boston in terms of collaborating with some of the universities, whether they be in Boston proper or out, out near Marlborough and Worcester. There's some like WPI, for example, and MIT here in town. Yep. So we have been very active with that, and really in all of the cities where we have big development centers, we do that. So I'd love to chat about it and understand, like, what do you want from Boston Scientific? How can we help? And a lot of times for something like that, just strategic guidance can be very helpful to really help point an organization in a direction and support. So let's talk afterwards.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more.
Hey, Dave. I'm Pat Helfrich, Vice President of Global Marketing with a company called CASMed. We were just acquired by Edwards Life Sciences.
Great.
But quick question.
Congrats.
Thank you. Quick question with regard towards your view on how early stage technology in development often gets stifled. What are the stalls in the product development process? I'm sure through your career you've seen a lot of emerging technologies that might have had a lot of promise and they don't get out of development and commercialized. I'm just curious, at a high level, what 2 or 3 things you think cause that?
Yeah, I wish I could say that's never happened to me. But the reality is that there's a lot more failure than there is success, right, in this kind of a role. So we run into the same challenge that startups do, I think, for our early stage efforts, which is that we show feasibility and proof of concept, and we can get that even through first in human, trials, and really show benefit there. I think where some of the frustrations have come in terms of moving those forward is really getting the businesses engaged enough along the way that they see that new thing that you've created that you care so much about, right? They see that as part of a portfolio and a story moving forward, right? So I think some of the early efforts that we did, we probably didn't engage, the businesses enough along the way. And so when we got to the point where we had proved it, maybe we sort of missed on stakeholder engagement, as well as maybe to a certain extent business case development. So I'd say those are the 2 things that I've seen, not just from internally, but I would also say externally, to be honest, as I commented on earlier. But I would say that what's happened more recently is we've been able to essentially bring people along with us a bit better, so that when we do succeed, we have a bit more of a planful landing pad, for those. And I think a big part of that is it's if you ever get a chance to, so just this idea of balancing, we can't innovate in the core because that's what the businesses are doing every day. So that really happens like next generation products. And then we can't be doing stuff that's so far out that it's unattainable for the company. So we really try and balance that with things that are close enough in that that they can see a landing pad in the company, but far enough out that we really are the tip of the spear. And that is actually a tough balancing act to create, but it is what we do and has been successful for us. Yeah.
Thank you, Dave. And that concludes our time here today. I just want to thank Dave Knapp.
Oh, thank you.
Great job.